John chapter 1. John chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was without form, and it was void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep waters. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Without him, nothing was created that has been created. In him was light, and in him was life, and that life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness, and he called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, day one. Good morning, and welcome to this day one of the week. And today's lesson is coming from the reading plan, which we are right here in John chapter 1, which we just read John 1, 1 through 5, but also kind of a little bit of Genesis 1, 1 through 7, as they are meshed together, as John has just written this in a way that you can just blend them, like so easily. And if you keep on reading, he goes on to talk about the Word in verse 14 of chapter 1. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. Glory as the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. Oh, and while we're talking about grace and truth, look at verse 17. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has seen God at any time. The only begotten God who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him. Now, John is picking up on a moment in the book of Exodus. When Moses asked God, he says, "Show me your glory." And God says to Moses, he says, "No one can see my glory and live." He's like, "If you look upon me, you will die." And so he says, "But I'll cover you with my hand, and when I pass by, you can see my back." And as he passes by, Moses covers him, and he reveals just like only his back to Moses, and he proclaims his name. He says, "Yahweh, Yahweh, a God merciful and gracious, abundant in steadfast love and faithfulness, and slow to anger, and abundant in steadfast love and faithfulness." And that word faithfulness is the same word as truth. It's the word actually where we get the word amen. It means like that's truth. You're speaking truth. It's faithful. What you're saying is solid. And so notice how John has taken the first and the last words from the way that God describes himself: gracious and faithful or truthful. And he kind of like condenses it down. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. That glory of God came through Jesus Christ. No one has seen God at any time, but the only begotten, that is Jesus, the Son, the Word, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained that one that no one has seen. So as we dive in this morning, I want to let that question hang over everything we're going to talk about. So when did Jesus make his Father's glory known? I feel like that's a bad grammar, but, well, my mom did check my grammar worksheet, so I never actually learned English. So, anyways, when did Jesus make his Father's glory known? In one sense, you could say kind of throughout everything that he did. But we're gonna come back to this question. But here's the thing. Okay, so just as a little preface, this is going to be a history-heavy lesson. We're not going to be going into crazy details on things, but this is going to be we're setting a scene. Because what I want to do, and I alluded to it in the Bible class, is we're going to try to imagine ourselves in the world of the cross, but not the cross after Jesus's. But I want to lock in on what it meant. What was crucifixion like? What would it have been heard in the ears of those in the first century when someone like Paul writes to them in the way that Bruce just read to us about "we preach Christ crucified"? What does that mean? How would that have sounded to them that Jesus Christ was crucified? So first off, to talk about the earliest records of crucifixion, it actually began in the Persian Empire. If you go to the book of Esther, you don't have to turn there, I'm just going to reference it, but in Esther the story of Esther is it's actually a hilarious story. It's kind of a big irony the whole time. Everyone's kind of talking past each other, and the whole script gets turned upside down. There's a guy named Haman who's really jealous of a guy named Mordecai, who's a Jew, and his intent is to take that guy Mordecai, and he's gonna hang him. And it's usually in my Bible it says on a gallows, but if you literally word for word, what it says, he intends to hang him on a tree. And it's one of the first descriptions of this type of death. Probably would have been just a large sharpened stick that you just stuck someone on the top of to humiliate them and to show your power over them. But it's brutal, but that's what happens in the book of Esther. But instead of Mordecai being hung on the tree, it's actually the guy who wanted to hang Mordecai on the tree ends up being hung on his own tree. Haman gets hung up on a tree. Literally, that is the phrase. Like when you read hung on a gallows, it is the phrase hung on a tree. And this is, history attests to this as well, because Persian Empire, they were famous for doing this. They would raid a city and they would stick people up on pikes as a symbol of their conquest over the city. Later, when Persia tries to invade Greece, they get pushed back. And Greece, to mock them, takes their general and puts it on a tree on the border of between Persia and Greece. And they actually hang this general up, and it's kind of in the more traditional way that we imagine or see crucifixion, but like arms outstretched, nailed up on two pieces of wood cross-beamed. And they do that as a sign of mockery towards the Persians, to say, come on, try us. Like, try to conquer us again. And they actually take their method of execution that the Persians had used on the Greeks, and then the Greeks throw it back at them. And then, eventually, Greece gets conquered by Rome. And the Romans, they kind of create a world peace at the time. It's like Rome really becomes the first well-established world empire. There's a time of peace. It's called the Pax Romana. And this is actually the world that Caesar Augustus founded, that Jesus is born into. It's really actually kind of stable. There's not wars. It's kind of everything's like way out on the fringes of the empire. And it's very peaceful. Except they also have this practice of crucifixion that is just the symbol of Rome's power over life and death. Throughout like recorded history, there's not a lot of accounts of crucifixion that are like named victims. Because here's the thing, it was just a slave's death. What would happen is there was actually a law: if a slave murders his master, all of the slaves of that master would be crucified. And there is a record of this happening in the first century, where a slave murdered his master, and it was so insane that it was like right near the center of Rome, and the Senate actually tried to like not make that law be placed into effect, but to no avail. It was a very small minority of people who spoke up against it, and every one of the slaves was crucified, like hundreds, and then women, children, like young, old, everyone just hung up on a tree, all lined up down the road to Rome. There's accounts of raidings of cities as Rome spreads their empire, where they would just line up the roads as well with people on trees, hung up there, and it's a symbol of Rome's power and authority. And this is the world of the first century. Crucifixion is actually kind of common. But the thing is, it's something unrecorded. What would happen is once someone died, they would kind of just be left as a food for the birds, and then eventually taken down and thrown into mass graves. And we don't have many physical anything preserved physically of crucifixion, save one recent discovery. And this is really interesting. I think you all will like this. Or I think it's just kind of fascinating. What you're seeing right here is an ankle bone. And this is an ankle bone, and as you can see, is where the nail would have been driven through is right along the heel. And this was put into a bone box, and this man was actually crucified in the first century. This would have been right around the same time of Jesus, and he apparently had family that cared for him enough to go and take his body, and let it decompose, and then collect his bones, put them in a bone box, and stored in a family tomb. And this was uncovered and this was fascinating because the nail was still in the bone. usually they would take these out because metal is valuable and could be reused. But if you notice, where's my pointer? Here we go. If you notice on the kind of the little drawing here, you can't really see it super well on the screen, but the nail had gotten like warped and hooked, so it couldn't be taken out, so they just tossed them in. But right here is we get a little bit of evidence of what the act would have looked like in itself. Traditional like Christian paintings of Jesus' crucifixion kind of have his feet kind of overlaid and one nail driven through him. But that's, as we can see here, again, art, it's inspired by the Bible, but it is not inspired, if you get my meaning. So what crucifixion actually would have looked like in practice was kind of as you were placed up on the pole, your feet would have been placed on either side of the pole, and then two nails driven through the heel of your foot. So it would give you leverage to push up and breathe on the cross. And so this is one of the only like physical evidences of the act of crucifixion. There's been one other discovery, and I didn't have a picture of it because it was kind of like people debate these things. But a similar wound has been found in the bones of someone where there was seemingly some sort of nail that was driven through, but it's a debatable thing. But this one, the nail is still there in the bone of the heel of this man who was crucified. And so this is like just kind of laying groundwork. Like all of you, you're living in the first century, like this is what crucifixion would have looked like to everyone, or would have resonated in their ears, is a slave's death and nothing to be noted. Again, like I mentioned, art is inspired by the Bible, but it is not inspired. In almost all depictions of, actually I think it is, in every depiction of the crucifixion, Jesus has some sort of like loincloth covering his private parts. That's not what they would have done at all. You've been completely stripped naked and displayed for everyone to see, and it was humiliating. It was as much humiliating as it was painful. And that was what the intent of crucifixion was. Like the Romans perfected it. It started in Persia, but the Romans perfected the art of crucifixion to maximize pain, humiliation, and to be a deterrent to anyone else who would ever think about doing anything. Now this, again, I'm asking y'all to try to imagine yourselves in that world, but it's actually not, it still happens today. It's actually been adopted by radical sects of Islam. And this right here is a text from most notably in the Quran, and what they have different titles for their sections, but what we would think in the Bible is chapters and verses. Most notably in chapter 5, verse 33, it says this: "The punishment for those who fight Allah and His Messenger, that is Muhammad, and strive to spread corruption on the earth is that they are to be killed, or crucified, or have their hands and feet cut off on opposite sides, or to be banished from this land. That is, to disgrace them in this life, and in the hereafter, but they will have a terrible punishment." Again, same thing you see with the Roman Empire. It's an act of humiliation. Like it's intent to bring shame upon the one who it is done to. And again, I'm about to tell a story here, and I just want to preface it with, if you want to learn about Islam, go invite your neighbor who is Muslim to lunch and have them explain to you, because the example we're about to look at is extremely radical sect. This isn't a broad stroke against all Islam. Don't believe it to be true, obviously, but I'm not an Islamic scholar. You should talk to someone else. What we're going to look at right here is actually a town called Sinjar. And all of this about how crucifixion, what it was like in the first century, is this. It was brought to my attention by this historian, and I'm kind of a history nerd a little bit. I kind of wish I had studied that in college instead of a business degree, because now I have a business degree and I teach ancient Jewish literature. But it's world we live in, whatever. But right here, this guy is a historian. His name's Tom Holland, and he actually was raised going to church. I believe he was Anglican, but he actually turned atheist because, he would hear about Christianity growing up, but then whenever they would talk about the Romans or Nebuchadnezzar or the Babylonians and the Persians, he was those guys actually seemed a lot cooler. He thought they were really neat. And he kind of a gradual drip, kind of fell away from any sort of belief, became an atheist, but then continued pursuing a degree in the study of ancient cultures, specifically the Roman Empire. He really liked the Roman Empire at the time of the first century, and so he went on to study. And like any good historian, you try to imagine yourself in that world so that then you can write your dissertation or be interviewed for Discovery Channel or something like that. But here he was actually going to this village. This is in the Middle East. It's a town called Sinjar. And it was going to be a documentary on the radical group of Islam called ISIS. This was kind of during their height in the early 2010s, mid-2010s. And this city, they were actually the first Westerners to enter it after ISIS had come in, destroyed the place, lined up women, children, men. If they were women that were of age, they were carted off into sex slavery. And if they were men that were not converted to Islam, then they were crucified, following said passage that we just read. They crucified them up and down the street, the radical Islamists. And so the members of ISIS, they take them and they crucified them. And it kind of, this historian, Tom Holland, when he came to this town, it suddenly was it opened up, he says, an existential crisis of he suddenly realized that this is the world of Rome. This is what Rome would have done to cities that they conquered. And he said, this is a world where the cross doesn't mean a symbol of triumph over death, but rather the ability for you to hold the power of life and death over your enemies. And so he went to this town and he looked around and he realized he had kind of observed the Romans in a way that you study. Say you're a zoologist and you study lions and tigers and you go to the zoo and you look at them in the cage. That's very different than going and standing in the cage with them. And he suddenly realized that this is standing in a city that was in a mindset of power that was similar to how Romans saw power. And this is a quote from him whenever he observed the city. As he said, it's possible to spend your whole life studying the Romans and never have to breathe the dust of a town where people had been crucified. He says, when I did, I felt ashamed at the lack of imagination and historical empathy that I'd shown in not wondering what had changed since the time of Caesar and the time at which I was standing. To the Islamic State, crosses served as symbols of their power, and that's what they were to the Romans as well. He goes on to state, the cross served as a symbol for the powerful to have the power to humiliate and torture the powerless. That's the world of the cross. And that's the world that what Bruce read for us just now 15 minutes ago, that was dropped into. Someone boasting in the fact that a man was crucified. And we know this is the world that it was with the first years of people who heard about Jesus crucified. That was absurd. And as Paul describes it, foolishness. Because if you look here, this is actually the first depiction of Jesus' crucifixion ever discovered. You can't really tell anything at all from the screen. But there's a sketch of it right here. And what you see is a man over here kind of raising his hand in praise. And this is his name. This is called the Alexamenos Graffito. It's actually first century graffiti. This is someone that just was using a sharp rock or something to scrape onto the wall of a city in Rome. And actually, when I got to visit Rome, I had the pleasure of visiting it last year, I found out that this was 1 minute walk away from one spot that we had toured, and I just didn't realize it. Could have gone and seen it, and I was really upset afterwards. But you can just look at a picture of it right here. So whenever you have this sketch, what it says is, this is the name of the man, Alexamenos, and it says, Sevete Theon. Translated, Alexamenos worships his God. It's mocking the crucifixion. That's Jesus, but with a donkey's head on the cross. And this man, raising his hand in praise towards it, is just seen as a mockery. This dates back maybe to the 1st century, or maybe they think late 2nd century. This is the world of the cross. It's absurd. It makes no sense. It's a symbol of power, of the powerful, to shame and humiliate those underneath them. And so with all that in mind, let's revisit our question. If you will, turn to John chapter 12. This is where we're going to be bringing it home. How did Jesus make known his Father's glory? How did he do it? And I'll erase this because I want to draw something else over here in a second. If you will, look down in John chapter 12, and I guess it would be helpful if I was also turned there. John chapter 12. So there have been promises in the Old Testament pointing toward someone to come from the line of David that will be, the phrase is raised up or lifted up, and that will go up and take up his throne. They take up the throne of David and establish his kingdom. Like, that's what's kind of been the anticipation for hundreds of years now. And things are kind of like heating up around Jesus. We're about to jump into the text right in the middle, literally the direct center of the Gospel of John, as he approaches Jerusalem the last week of his life. And when he enters into Jerusalem, like, this is the week of Passover. So the fame of Jesus is at an all-time high. Roman power, the religious leaders of the day, everyone has their attention towards this man and his ministry. And the city of Jerusalem is just like this powder keg that's just waiting for a spark to explode. Because everyone's saying that he's the Messiah. In fact, as he approaches Jerusalem, they're shouting. Look at verse 13 of chapter 12. They took branches and palm trees. They went out to meet him. They began to shout, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, even the King of Israel." And Jesus, he rides in on a donkey's colt, and it says, "Fear not, daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt." This has all of the imagery and the language and the patterns of the one to come who's going to sit on David's throne, that will be lifted up as king. And then some Greeks, they come to seek Jesus, and look at what he says in verse 23. In verse 23, let's look at this, a few verses here in this chapter. And he says, Jesus answered them, saying, "The hour has come." Throughout all the Gospel of John, multiple times, something will happen. He says, "The hour has not yet come," or "the hour is coming." The hour has come, he says, "for the Son of Man to be glorified." And he says, "Truly I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone, but if it dies, it bears much fruit." And then now, if you will, hop down to verse 31. Because Jesus states this. He says, "Now the judgment is upon this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. And I, if I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men to myself." And John does this a few times. If you look at verse 33, it's kind of like he pauses and then leans in and tells you what's going on in the story. Verse 33 says, he was saying this to indicate the kind of death with which he was about to die. So Jesus says, "I'm about to be lifted up," which is in the ears of them, they would have thought "Oh, lifted up." Like David's promise that one will be lifted up onto his throne. He says, "When I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men to myself." And now look down at verse 37. It says, "Even though he had done many signs before them, they still were not believing in him, so that the word of the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled, which he spoke, 'Lord, who has believed our report? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed?' For this reason they could not believe. For Isaiah said again, 'He's blinded their eyes and hardened their heart, lest they see with their eyes and understand with their heart, and they return, and I would heal them.'" Now, pay close attention to verse 41. "These things Isaiah said because he saw his glory, and he spoke about them." Now remember, that was our question that's now on the screen that we've been kind of letting hang over all of this. Is from the beginning of this gospel, John said that we saw God's glory revealed, his grace and truth in the Son. We saw the glory revealed. But what is the glory? Isaiah apparently also saw it. And what two passages did he just quote from in Isaiah? Look at it. In verse 38, "Lord, who has believed our report? To whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed?" And verse 40, "He has blinded their eyes and hardened their heart, lest they see with their eyes and understand with their heart, and they turn and I heal them." These are from two passages in Isaiah. If you will, I'll have you place your finger here and mark, and let's go back and lay our eyes on them. Look at Isaiah first, Isaiah chapter 6. Check it out. Isaiah chapter 6. He's quoting from verse 10, but look at how the chapter begins, because this is just an important Bible study tip. If you read an Old Testament quotation in the New Testament, go back and read the whole chapter, maybe the whole section, maybe the whole book. so that you know the context of the verse that they're quoting. Look at how this section begins. In chapter 6 and verse 1, it says, "In the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple." He's gazing into the heavenly throne room of God. And how does he describe it? Yahweh is high and lifted up and seated on his throne. And he sees that, and it's like, holy, holy, holy. It's an amazing scene as he gazes into the reality of the heavens, where God's sitting on his throne. And he calls him high and lifted up. Now, what's interesting is that phrase is repeated in the book of Isaiah. Do you want to guess what other chapter it's repeated in? Or what other section? Go to Isaiah 52. Isaiah chapter 52. This is famously Isaiah 53, but the section actually begins in verse 13 of chapter 52, and that's the beginning of this final servant poem. And look at how it goes. In Isaiah chapter 52, verse 13, "Behold, my servant will prosper. He will be high and lifted up and greatly exalted." So in Isaiah, 2 times he uses the phrase high and lifted up to describe who? God seated on his throne, and then whatever will happen to this servant. And then look at chapter 53, verse 1. "Who has believed our report? Whom has the arm of Yahweh been revealed? He grew up before him," that is the servant, "grew up before God like a tender shoot, like a root out of parched ground. He had no stately form or majesty that we should look upon him. He was despised, forsaken, a man of sorrows, and acquainted with grief, like one from whom men hide their face. Despised, we did not esteem him. Surely our griefs he himself bore, our sorrows he carried. Yet we ourselves esteem him stricken, smitten of God, afflicted. He was pierced through for our transgression. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastising of our peace fell upon him, and by his wounds we are healed." The one high and lifted up. If you want to look back at John 12, those 2 chapters that he quotes from, Isaiah 6, the throne of God, Isaiah 53, the suffering servant, the one who is high and lifted up. And what is the moment that Jesus says he will be lifted up? It's when he says that he's going to die. John sees both of these blended together, these 2 chapters blended together in his mind. The throne of God in the heavenly spaces and the suffering servant up on the cross. God came down, became a human amongst us, and his lifting up, his glorification, the moment the glory of the Father is revealed, like it was to Isaiah, is on a cross. Like, that's so absurd that anyone would ever think to say that. And that's precisely the point. This is impossible to come from the mind of a human being. In the world of the cross, where the cross means power of the powerful to rule over the life of the powerless, like, we live now in the kingdom of the crucified king. And when he's lifted up, when he takes up a throne, in John saying we saw his glory, we beheld it, it's the cross. And then also, as it was brought up this morning, this doesn't make any sense. Like, it makes no sense in any timeline, in any world, in any place, save one world. The one where there was also an empty tomb that followed the cross. They're inseparable. The cross makes no sense unless there's actually an empty tomb and a real power that flowed out into the first century. But then the empty tomb can only happen because of the cross. Like, that's what's going on. And it's insanity. Like, we need to reclaim the insanity of the cross, because that's the power of it. It wouldn't have made any sense, and yet it's true. And it actually got traction and went forth and changed the world. Like we are all sitting on the other side of the world 2,000 years later, speaking in a language that didn't exist when this happened, and we're talking about it, and we're gathering around. We're all sitting here together because of this moment in time. Like, that's crazy. Like, I hope you feel the insanity of this, because that's how Paul, was so celebrating of it. And the thing is this turns the whole world upside down, because this is redefining what true power is. I had a friend tell me about a moment they saw the other day in an act of road rage. this guy like steps out of his car with a baseball bat, and then this other guy also got out of his car, but he had a family in the car, and the guy like swings the bat and the dude catches it, rips the bat out of his hands, and then like points at his family in the car, like points at him with the bat, and is like, you cut that out. You're like, wow, like that's powerful. Like that's power. To disarm the enemy and then like threaten them with their own power. But like, what if that other guy who took the bat from had a gun? Like that's power. You have the power of life and death now in your hand. Or more than that, what if, say that guy had a gun, but what if you're a person in political power that has an army of people with guns? Like that's power. Or what if you're Caesar, that at the snap of your fingers, you could have someone just nailed up on a piece of wood like nothing? Or even more so than that, what if you're the gods of the Roman Empire and you give the Roman Empire their power because you're the gods that they worship? But more than that, what if you're the God of gods that created everything, and then you have everything in your power and creation? That's who the claim of Yahweh is He created everything. That's the biblical claim of the Old Testament. But more than that, what if that God became a human and died on a cross? Like, that's power. When He could have changed it if He wanted to. He could have come down, and as they were mocking Him, He didn't say a thing. He said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Like, that's power in the kingdom of the crucified King. And so, like, this message this morning, I mean, it was like, there's so many things I have to leave out. But this is the power of the crucified King, the wisdom of God that makes foolish the wisdom of the world. And the thing is this revolution is now. Like all of us, if you're in Christ, let this definition of power transform the way you see the world. Like we saw in Colossians, Paul sees nothing outside of the range of the crucified and risen Lord. Like he's like, this should redefine every relationship that we see, every act and every step we take, whatever we do in word or deed, we do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. And then, lastly and finally, I just want to like reread like the passage that we started with in light of everything we've just talked about. In 1 Corinthians, it's on the screen. If you don't have you can turn there if you'd like, but I have it on the screen so we all have the same words. Paul says, for Christ did not send me to baptize, but to proclaim the gospel, not in wisdom of words, so that the cross of Christ will not be made empty. For the word of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those of us who are being saved, it's the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the cleverness of the clever I will set aside. Where is the wise man? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not come to know God, but God was well pleased through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. For indeed Jews ask for a sign and Greeks search for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified. To the Jews a stumbling block and to the Gentiles foolishness, but to those of us who are called, both to Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. Because of the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. For consider your calling, brothers, that there are not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble, but God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things which are strong. And the base things of the world and the despised God has chosen, that the things that are not, so that He may abolish the things that are, so that no flesh may boast before God. But by His doing you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, and righteousness, and sanctification, and redemption, so that just as it was written, let him who boasts boast in the Lord. There's no world where this makes sense except in the one where it's true. And in the cross, it's the moment of glory. Remember when we talked about Moses? He asked God if he could see His glory, and He says, no one can see my glory, for if anyone sees it, they'll die. The cross is the moment that God calls on us to gaze upon His glory and die. If He invites us to follow Him, He bids us to come and die. And so now that's the invitation this morning. The revolution is now, the kingdom is here, Christ is the King, and His throne is this moment of shame and suffering. But God used that and He transformed it. into something that is actually wonderful and beautiful. So for all of us here, whether it's you think you're in the depths of despair, look at the cross. God can change that into this great moment of victory. If you're someone who hasn't yet given your life to Jesus and you're walking about meaningless, this is our North Star. Like, this is our direction. The way of the cross leads home, as we sang. Come forward, like today, and join the kingdom of the crucified King. And if there's anyone who needs to respond to that call this morning, would you please come now as we stand and as we sing.